On today's show, I've got the wonderful Louise Harris. Louise was one of the first people I think I met and spoke to entering the world of franchising nearly a year ago now. I think it was sort of last September we spoke first. Louise is pretty well known in the franchising world, and I thought she'd be a fantastic person to have on the show. So, Louise, firstly, thank you very much for agreeing to come on the show.
Thank you for having me.
So, Louise, why don't you? I know we were joking before. You wear a number of hats, and in case I get one of them wrong, why don't you introduce yourself a little bit and explain, what you do in franchising and the different hats that you wear?
Sure. I cross a number of roles. You're absolutely right. So the first, I guess, the front-facing role that most people see me in is working with Mathnasium, who I do franchise recruitment for. So I look to help them find new franchisees. And I love that bit because it's a franchisor role. But I also have a business which is Franchise Projects. And through that, I write operations manuals, and I also help and design onboarding processes for new franchisees. So guide the people in the business to help them to bring people on successfully. That's a work in progress. It's been a slower take up because nearly all of my time is involved with operations manuals. And then the third sort of string to that is a piece of software which we've written called the Ops Portal. And that delivers the operations manual and a whole bunch more stuff, magic stuff for franchisors. So I do indeed carry those three. I'm also chair of the Advisor and Supplier Forum for the British Franchise Association. And I write for a number of publications in the franchise business.
Wow, that is a lot of hats. That's a lot of balancing going on there. And so, well, how did you, maybe you could sort of take us back, how did you get into franchising? Obviously, you're very passionate about franchising. You've got all those hats. How did you get into franchising, in the world of franchising in the first place?
Sure. Well, I guess I have to blame my husband. I met him on the 1st of December 2001, and there are no jokes involved in this. He came and swept my chimney. And we got together, and then in 2006, we were looking for a business opportunity. We thought we might franchise his business, but we weren't really sure. So we went to an exhibition, had a look, and found that there was a franchise that I completely distracted myself with, and we bought the franchise. It was a property related franchise, and we both have been involved with property of various guises along the way in our lives. So we thought we would do that, and it was a great introduction into franchising. They were BFA; they are no longer running as a franchise. But I kind of learned some of the things that I loved as being a franchisee, and some of the frustrations, and also some of the things that I think, as a franchisor, you need to remind franchisees what they're getting, and be all things. They were a great franchise actually, but they'd got their model slightly wrong in my view.
Right.
And then when I sold that business in 2010, we decided to franchise. At the beginning of 2010, so we worked with two really big characters in the franchise world, which was Clive Sawyer of Business Options and Jane Massey of then Owen White, but now IBB Law. And the two of them helped argue with us, create, broker arguments between us about what we were going to do, because Peter and I were very single-minded about this. He was the very practical, he'd run the business, but he was really the practical forefront of chimney sweeping. And I was the balance to that, which was the kind of business administration, getting to grips with what does this actually look like. And between us, we created Wilkins Chimney Sweep, which we then sold in 2018.
Wow,
and it was like my baby.
I bet. The fact you've managed to sell it means that you must have done something right. And it sounds like you've got that. I can imagine when you've got those differing personalities, it can either work against you, or it sounds like you made it work for you, and it was a constructive, creative debate or whatever.
It was.
So it sounds like you had some challenges, just even setting up the franchise and figuring out how you were going to do that. But in that period of where you set up a franchise and then we sold it, you must have had that sounds like a very long journey along the way. It's a very, very quick way of saying. So what challenges did you face on that journey, and I guess how did you overcome them?
So I think there were a number of them. I think that our first challenge is not one that a lot of people will have faced, which is just that it's a really quirky industry. I think there were some benefits about being Wilkins Chimney Sweep. I'll talk about those in a second. But there were some, people, the first question often was, is there a need? And I think once you've had to convince someone that there's a need for something, you're kind of on the back foot, because they then go home as a prospect franchisee and they talk to their family, and the family take the mick and they go, oh, really? So, or chimney and all of that. Yeah. And actually it takes a certain type of person to go, I can see the business advantage of this. So I think that was something that not all franchises experienced. But I think there are questions in every franchise industry, which is kind of the first question that people will ask, and you have to address it. You cannot hide behind fluff. If you don't address it and you don't help people to understand, they just aren't going to come to the party at all. Or you've convinced them of something, you've kind of tried to persuade them, but they fall out later on. Oh, I knew this wasn't right. You convinced me that I should do this. And so you don't want that in an industry. So that was our first hurdle, really. We also, it was actually around tech. I mean, it's really hard to imagine that in 2010, we didn't really have the cloud. It was really on the cusp. And so we went with a safe option, which was remote desktop working. And the technology we're using just wasn't really cutting it. And actually one of our big wins was moving into a cloud-based technology,
right.
Working with the partner who I now do the ops portal with. But he just was a brilliant developer and added loads of value to that. But the biggest difficulty, I think, now for any franchise is that you've got to be cutting edge tech. You've got to keep ahead of it. You've got to keep on top of, and by tech, this is broad spectrum. Yeah. It's everything, it's not just the AI, it's CRMs, it's social media, it's being visible. How do you make sure that you're at the forefront? Because we're selling a franchise, we're selling a business opportunity. We have to be the best there is in our business. You can't just sit back and coast. The business has to change and adapt. And I think, we were lucky. We were in a really old industry, and we could make huge headway just by, ironically, just by having a website.
Yeah, I can imagine it's very, very, very kind of almost other than, I don't know, polishing silver or something, it's like, it's one of the traditional industries I can think of, really. Yeah.
It is. I don't know that it's the oldest profession, but it's certainly one that has been around for so many years. And it cleaned up its act before we got involved. Back in the 1890s, the Climbing Boys Act stopped the kids being involved. So our business had never been involved, but we traded as Wilkins Chimney Sweep, established 1895. So we had all of the heritage and all of the new stuff. Brought it with it, and it's still trading. They're still recruiting franchisees. And what's lovely is I'm still involved in the chimney sweeping industry with a professional association. And what's lovely is that the members often reference us. They'll talk to us, well, what do Wilkins do about this, and how does that work? And of course, whilst there's some IP and we won't share it, we also try to help people be the best they can be.
Very good, very good. Well, so as part of that, you mentioned about staying ahead and so on. This podcast is primarily focused on, I guess, content marketing, and obviously with my flavour, it's in particular video, but it doesn't have to be video. So, how do you see, for either for that industry or others, how are things changing, and what's important to you in terms of what people need to keep on top of, really?
Yeah. I think I've given quite a lot of thought in the past. I think it's very difficult for a franchisor to get great content out there, because the best people to make great content for the business that showcases the business are the franchisees. But equally, the franchisor's got to take some control over what that looks like, because there is a danger. Listen, if a franchisee is going to be malicious and intentionally malicious, I'm not sure that you're ever really going to lock that down, because they're going to do it and then the relationship is done.
Yeah.
And it's rare, I think. But what does happen is people not quite thinking about the content. And an example, and I'm hoping that Easy Storage will be comfortable that I said this, but there was an example of a post which on social media, which was a cat in a box, and underneath it said, "The only thing we don't store." It made it really clear that we don't store cats. We're not putting a cat in a box. We're not putting a cat in storage. I love cats. It was really an innocuous post. And in fact, it wasn't from a franchisee, but it just got slated. I mean, the animal rights protectionists they just didn't read it. And it just spoke to me really loudly, and to Easy Storage. I mean, they really dealt with it fantastically. They were all over it and understood what had happened, I think. But it's such a small thing, and somebody needs to control it. So there's this danger, this kind of insidious danger that means that people actually don't do something. They just stop completely.
Yeah.
Instead of putting together perhaps really considered information. I love that you create content at head office, you share that so the franchisees have got that visible, perhaps on their Facebook or wherever it is, TikTok, Instagram, wherever their relevant platforms are. But I think that whole piece around getting a franchisee to make content feels frightening. And I think it still feels frightening, because franchisors by their nature should be a little bit controlling, because they want one brand going in the same direction with the same messaging, and they don't want that diluted, and they certainly don't want to risk it's reputational risk that they're trying to avoid. And of course they're trying to build reputation, and it's so relatively simple to get it wrong. So I think my guidance, and this is not, you haven't set me up for this, but my guidance is always just work with professionals who know what they're doing, and can make it look good and make it coherent and continuous. And yeah.
Well, thank you. Like I say, I didn't know you were going to say this. So that's thank you for saying it. But yeah, and I have. It is a bit of a paradox, isn't it? I think it is difficult. I can see the dilemma for franchisors, and some franchisors I've spoken to, perhaps the ones where the product is a little bit more transactional rather than service based. Although some of them are still service based. They just don't want the franchisees to create any content at all. Which, as you said,
Yeah.
I think it misses is a big missed opportunity there. I think personally, because surely the whole point is that the whole point of franchise, I often say, is that you're supposed to be the friendly local face of that national brand. And so if you're not putting that friendly face out there, how can you? Yeah, it just seems a missed opportunity to me. But I do see the danger, and it's a tricky one, isn't it? I think it's not
consistency is one of the challenges of that, though, because you've got a franchisee in the territory. Let's say they're delivering a service. I'm trying to think of something that isn't franchised that I don't know, but I'm going to talk about dog walking, for example. You've got a franchisee who typically will be quite engaged with that service, and they're out finding new business and everything, and they may actually be standing in when their dog walkers aren't there. So they're actually busy. But then they'll stop and they'll go, okay, I need to create some content, but it's too sporadic.
Yeah.
So I will do audit for companies. Literally it's as simple as, can you go through each of their Facebook pages, tell me when the last date of their post is, tell me if there's anything on there that you find to be against franchising or anything like that. So, or I might just do the calls or whatever I've done. I've done a little bit of mystery shopping. I'm not wholly good at it. I've blown my cover on a couple of occasions. But one of the things that I can see, and I see it when I'm buying, if I'm looking for gardener, for example, is topic of the month for me at the moment, I'll go onto their Facebook page and there's nothing on there. Or the last post was Happy Christmas.
Yes, yeah,
Well,
it just doesn't. Yeah, it doesn't send the right
makes me
message.
think they're so busy they can't work, or they're not working anymore.
Yeah.
And so it's a really mixed message. So I kind of feel like there should, it's almost that they should put a post on after Christmas and say, I'm now going to be so busy, I'm not going to update this. I know you're looking here. I really do want work still. Just something that's humanizing. And think about the places that you wouldn't put an advert in a newspaper that said Happy Christmas still. Well, actually, that's probably not true. There's probably one or two who have, but you would change it up because you're paying money. And I think social media can be a little bit misused because they're not paying for the facility always. And I feel like it could be done badly, and that's why people have stepped back a bit.
Yeah.
They get busy, the franchisee gets busy, they roll along, so they don't do anything, which is actually worse. It's just worse than doing a few posts every now and then, I think.
I agree. And I think that I don't think most of the algorithms and most of the platforms won't reward you for that. So when you do start posting, nobody's going to see it anyway because you haven't posted for ages, so it's almost pointless unless you are regular and systematic. And you have some sort of plan, like you say, it's in line with the brand and so on. Then it's kind of I think it can be worse than useless. Yeah.
I'm a big fan of the.
Sorry, go on.
Sorry, in franchising we tend to attract suppliers that have thought about this, and there are a couple of suppliers in our industry who you can work with to push media, to push social media, to push posts, and it manages at a kind of head office level. And I think if the franchisor is invested, and that's the first hurdle, because some of us are very old and we didn't need social media in my day, and so they haven't quite got with the program. But I think some of these opportunities really work very well, but I think it's a commitment at head office level or franchisor level to help assist that process. Sorry, I interrupted your question, but I thought it was important to kind of.
No, I agree. And again, I mean, when it comes to video, I've already seen that if the franchisor is not really engaged, then the franchisees won't engage. And kind of why should they, in a sense? So, which is why I've kind of changed my tactics. I'm trying to work far more with franchisors first before we talk about working with franchisees. That seems to be kind of resonating with people. What I was going to say is, obviously, we've talked about some of the negative aspects of when things could go wrong. I just wondered if you'd had an example, either with Wilkins or with Mathnasium or any of the other, maybe some other brands you've seen that you haven't even been involved in, where content marketing, and particularly if you have a video example, but it doesn't have to be video, has really worked, and has been very successful.
Yeah. Varied. It's varied. I think that there's no doubt for me at franchise projects that when I put a post out, I'm not consistent. I'm actually pretty rubbish about it because I work on my own and I haven't yet invested at that level because I wasn't sure about the messaging. But when I put a post out, if I can get that traction, I can see immediately it changes. It completely brings new business. For me, LinkedIn, because I'm working business to business, or it brings new inquiries. The rest is down to me. But in Wilkins, we were new, obviously, and we used Hootsuite. And we had a PR lady. She was fantastic. In fact, she's the BFA PR lady now, Louise Bruce. And Louise was fabulous. She created some lovely pictures for us where it's very difficult because we're working in people's homes. So you have to be really careful about taking photographs there. People are funny and I don't blame them. We're working in their homes. They want to be secure. So we have to be careful. And to be honest, it's going to be a bloke at a chimney. That's not really inspiring. we ran an animal campaign, and actually that worked quite well. So, best picture of the animal in someone's home by the fire, ideally.
Right.
That actually worked quite well, and that was very much generated by Louise. And we ran some competitions. They work, they do engage. People are that little bit competitive. And, if I had my life over again, I would do something where I could definitely involve animals in all of my social media, because people engage with it. Animals or kids, I guess, but kids more difficult.
There's something less threatening, isn't there? You always get more posts. If I post a picture of my dog, it's far more engaging than anything I have to say. Yeah.
It's absolutely true. I put a picture of my cat, and it's just, I'll get 200 likes just because it's a picture of a cat. No one's read the content.
Yeah, it's a cat clicking.
Exactly,
it's funny, isn't
it? So, but what I mean, because I'm not directly involved in it now, it's less. I don't market myself well. I know that, but I don't market myself well because I'm busy. I'm a very tight.
Right? You were saying earlier on that you'd were so busy, right?
Yeah, I mean, so I changed track with my business. I went out as franchise projects a year last November and just said, I'm going to be writing operations manuals and doing onboarding, and I'm really interested to hear from people. And what's been amazing really is that I haven't stopped. I have, the BFA I do find them as a great source of business because I get to speak to lots of people. Also, the banks, they also are speaking to new franchisors, and I do get a lot of people who are interested, who talk to me about franchising. And therefore about the manual. And a lot of the work that I'm doing is for the future as well, because they're too early in their business to really be talking at this stage. But it was one post, and somehow I went, I'm here. And they went, oh, at last, someone who hates that turgid stuff of operations manual. So was it luck? Chimney sweeps are lucky. So maybe it was, but I think
you built that reputation, though, haven't you? I think I was writing for my Video Academy guys about this. If you're gonna create a piece of social media, it better be valuable or inspirational or whatever. But if people don't know you, then it's pretty hard to demonstrate that value. So I watched a video about Steve Jobs the other day. It wasn't even a very good video, but I knew it was Steve Jobs, right? And I knew it was going to be interesting because I know who Steve Jobs is. So it's worth me watching it anyway, because I know it's going to be good. So similarly for you, if you hadn't had that background and said, I'm starting to write manuals, like, who cares? No, who is this? I don't know who this is. So it says a lot about your reputation that, you can put out one post and get an amazing result. So
I had a very lucky entry into franchising, and I referenced one of the things about being Wilkins Chimney Sweep. One of the advantages for me was at networking. I was always branded. Most people, when they met me afterwards, sold Wilkins, didn't know who I was. Because I wasn't in my Wilkins branding. But one of the advantages of it, and I know this sounds really simple, I don't know how you are with names, but lots of people don't remember names. They know they've met you before, but they can't quite remember the name. And suddenly there's someone alongside, you're talking, and you've got to make an introduction. I had my name on me. Now, I'm not Mrs. Wilkins, but actually it worked really well for people to just go, Mrs. Wilkins.
Right.
And I know that some of my traction came from that. I also entered franchising at a time when there was a little bit of a ruction about exhibitions, which has not gone away. But I, very perhaps naively, was really upset about what had happened, and felt like, as a member of the BFA, I was really not being heard. So I was at a forum and was probably overly vocal, but I was really upset. I felt like my money was wasted doing the exhibition because there was a competitor exhibition. And the thing that I did was just talk openly and quite impassioned, I guess. And somebody said to me at the next time, "Oh, the gobby bird." And I think inadvertently it possibly did me a favor, however
Right.
much I didn't necessarily like it. But I feel like, I had paid to be a member of an association, and I think you should throw stones from within, and you should be part of it and try to make it better. And that's always been my principle. You can witch about stuff all you like, but unless you try to change things, then it's not going to change. So
But you better
that
bitch
was
to the right
really
people, right? If you're just bitching behind people's backs, that doesn't change anything. That's mean, right? So, but if you bitch to somebody's face, you say this isn't right. Yeah,
yeah.
that's.
And they don't run when they see me, or to my knowledge they don't. So I may have been okay.
I have noticed a few
But
eye rolls. No, I haven't really. No,
I've met some amazing people, and I think I've met people that I wouldn't have had access to otherwise. Really, I met the recruitment team from McDonald's, who are just, people use them constantly as an example. They hold them in high regard as doing franchising right. And I sat next to, and I'm really embarrassed, I can't remember his name, but at my first forum that I went to, and he said to me, "I'm loving watching the Wilkins brand because you've got it right. It's about branding, and what you've done looks really good." And then I sat next to someone, who was older than my dad. It was really exciting to meet someone, really old in the industry. He was a really safe pair of hands. And for that reason, I'm not going to tell you his name because I've just called him old. And I told him something that we were doing in our business, and he immediately said, "Oh, that is a fantastic idea. You are amazing." And he really made me feel good. And he made me feel like we were doing the right thing, because it was very easy as this kind of quirky business that not to feel grown up. And they single-handedly made me feel like we were okay. We were playing in the same market. And the franchise industry is really welcoming to people if they engage. If they don't engage, they find it really difficult. You can complain, you can tell people what's wrong, as long as you kind of bring a solution or bring some change, or don't go on about it all the time. But I think, it is a collaborative business, and I get to speak to some just amazing people.
I have to say, I've said it a couple of times. I hope people don't think I'm being sycophantic, but genuinely, it seems, compared to the previous sort of industry pond that I was fishing in, which was fine, it was just sort of normal, but franchising does seem, and I think that I hadn't really thought of it as that word, but because the whole model is collaborative, the people you tend to meet are by nature people who want to collaborate, and just because that's how that's what the business model is based on, and so they seem to be more welcoming and open and willing to chat and help, and it just seems a really friendly bunch of people.
Yeah, I find it that way, definitely, and I find that there's always someone I can pick up the phone to, or chat to on LinkedIn, or if I've got an email, amazingly, I might just drop them a card and say, "I've got this niggle, I've got something, or I've got a client who needs some help." I mean, I was talking to a Scottish client, and I managed to introduce her to a couple of people, and it was really helpful for her. And I think I love that connectivity. There is some competitive nature. We are still in the, I
Of course.
write manuals. There are other people who do, but actually we collaborate somehow. We work together, and together we are more. I mean, it really is
I call
a
it
team.
co-opetition. Of course you're going to be, the pond is bigger than you. Do you know what I mean? There's enough business out there, and it's that sort of not having a scarcity mindset. But yeah, like you said, we're stronger together, kind of thing. And yes, sometimes we'll compete. That's fine. Yeah.
And I love seeing things like the children's franchises. So someone like Anne-Marie Hutchinson, who is that her surname?
Martin.
Did I get that right? She was
Anne-Marie
Wilkins. Martin. Sorry, Anne-Marie. The thing that I love is to see her work with other kids franchises who technically they're competitors both at a franchise level, so they want the same type of people in their franchise, but also for a customer. You know, you want your kid to go to this dance class or that dance class. They're technically a little bit competitive, but they work together, and they work together to make the business, the whole environment more professional, stronger, get more traction. You know, 2 + 2 equals more than 4 in that example.
Yeah.
Sorry, Mathnasium.
It's imaginary numbers. It's a bit advanced, but yeah. Look, I've taken lots of your time, but I just wanted to, you've been through the whole cycle of being a franchisor, and now you've still got lots of other hats and so on. So what are your top 3 tips for franchisors? And I know that's very broad, so let's bring that down to, in terms of, we've talked about content, I'll keep it fairly broad though for you. What are your top 3 tips for franchisors concerning content marketing?
So I'm not an expert, as I've proven, but the first thing I would say, it's the message that my personal trainer gives me all the time, and the message you see everywhere is consistency. You've just got to show up and make it happen, because guess what? If there's no post, it's not there. It doesn't exist. So it isn't going away. So show up and do it.
Yep.
So that's the first thing, is consistency. The second thing is, if you are really concerned that your franchisees are going to fail you, then you might want to think about what's going wrong in there, but help them not to. Provide them with content, support them in that. And the last thing is, the young generation are used to dealing with social media. They're happy with it. They're comfortable moving around it. Find the right person or people to support you. Use a professional, but find someone that can actually drive that. I mean, in Mathnasium, we've got masses of young people who just love to be engaged with it. So I think that's, that would be my message. Is that helpful?
That's brilliant. Thank you. Yeah, that's great. Brilliant. Well, look, thank you so much, Louise. It's been really interesting talking to you. I always like talking to you, whether it's in person at an event or on a BFA Power Hour or now on the podcast. So thank you very much.
Thank you very much.